when you're on stage and they're not laughing, you still got to keep going. But when they're with you and they're laughing at all the subtle stuff, it just gives you so much confidence, and you can be who you're truly supposed to be up there. And that there's no better feeling than that.
This is Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, with Whitney and Jenkins. Hello and welcome to the 77th episode of Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, where I bring on guests and we talk about the inner authentic voice and the challenges and rewards that come from following it. This week I have with me comedian Tim Gaither. Tim is a Midwest native, but he now lives in Southern California, where he has become a regular in Los Angeles' The Laugh Factory, the Comedy Store, the Improv, Comedy and Magic Club, and Ice House. He is a seasoned comedian. He has been doing this for 20 plus years, performing in almost every state in the US, as well as Canada and Korea for the US troops. It was a pleasure to have this conversation with Tim and to dive deep into the beginnings of his chosen path of becoming a stand-up comedian and the wisdom that he has gained from doing so. Also, Tim is going to be in Nashville to perform a comedy house show right in my living room on October 26th. So if you happen to be in Nashville, I will put the ticket link into the show notes so you can click on it easily and you can join us. It's going to be a great time. We have Tim for laughs and we are providing food and drink for those who attend. So yeah, come on over. Without further blabbering from me, here is my conversation with comedian Tim Gaither. This podcast is really talking about like your inner authentic voice and following that thing within you, that driving force that maybe you call it intuition, maybe you call it presence, whatever you want to call it. And as a comedian, I feel like that requires an amount of awareness and presence. So the first thing that I'd like to ask my guests is, when is the first time that you realized that you had this like inner authentic voice of your own? Do you have a moment where you can recall recognizing that you had this thing inside of you that you were able to follow?
Um, Gosh, no, I don't know. I mean, I never felt when I first decided to be a comedian, I remember I was going to be a teacher and a wrestling coach. That was my plan, but I mean, that's what I said for 4 years. That's what I was going to do in college, and but I never really thought that was actually going to come to fruition. And then the closer I got to doing that, I started getting kind of anxious about it.
Hmm.
Like I don't want to be a teacher, especially I did this teacher aiding thing, and it was I just didn't like it. Like I didn't feel like this is where I'm supposed to be in my life or whatever. So to answer your question, I read this book. I ended up going to a counselor. I mean, I guess I should just tell the story because I I was starting to have a lot of anxiety about becoming a teacher and a wrestling coach, and I was getting ready to enter the School of Education, which is like the final step towards that.
Yeah.
Um, but the closer I got, the more I was like, I don't want to do this. And then I went over to a friend's house, or her apartment. We went to high school together, and we were just friends, and we listened to a Bill Hicks CD. And she asked me if I wanted to ride home, and I was like, no, I'm gonna walk home. And by the time I got back to my apartment, I was like, I'm gonna be a stand-up comedian. I was like, that was the funniest guy I've ever heard. And at that point in my life, I had never heard of him.
Yeah.
So that said to me, I can become a comedian for a living, even if I never get famous. You know, you can travel around and tell jokes. And so I went to my counselor the next day, and she didn't really know how to advise me. I was like, I'm going to be a comedian. I might as well get a degree because I've got 100 and something credit hours. I might as well get a degree. Um, what's the quickest degree I can get? And she was like, you can get a social science degree next semester. And I was like, all right, well, I'll take one of those, but I'm going to be a stand-up comedian. And she didn't really know how to advise me. And when I got home back to my apartment, she had left me a voicemail saying, I felt bad. I didn't know how to advise you. No one had ever come to me and said they're going to completely do a 180 and be a stand-up comedian. So, but I did find this book called Zen and the Art of Stand-up Comedy.
Mm.
And so I got that book and it was like 20 bucks and it was worth more than any textbook I'd ever gotten in my life. It was real short and easy to read and just kind of described what a comedian was. And there was this little paragraph that described what a comedian was and like what a stand-up comedian, kind of how they felt inside. And like almost something they were drawn towards and something they didn't even really have a choice in the matter. Even if
Hmm.
they didn't want to do it, they almost had to. It was like, and it described as a comedian. I wish I had the book in front of me to read the entire paragraph, but it was like you always felt like kind of the outsider looking in, and had a different perspective as than most people. And I got chills all over me when I read it because for 4 years I've been saying I'm going to be a teacher, but I didn't really want to be a teacher, and I knew that I could do voices, and I had this ability to make people laugh, especially in social situations like at a party or something. I could just kind of start riffing on things, and I was kind of shy, but I was always able to make people laugh in school, and it just spoke to me, like this is what I was born to do.
Yeah,
And um so I don't know if I'm doing a very good job of answering your question,
absolutely.
but
Yeah, yeah. You had a click in a moment. Of
yeah, and it just kind of was like, so as far as my authentic voice, I think as a comedian we're always striving to find that. And one of my favorite comedians, and in my opinion, one of the best comedians, Bill Burr.
Mhm.
I featured for him like, gosh, it's probably been 12 years ago already. Um, but he was in the front seat and I was in the back seat, and we were on the way to the Improv Comedy Club in Orlando, and somehow the subject came up of finding your voice.
Yeah.
And I think I asked him when he found his, and he was like, I still don't feel like I've completely found it, And even then, 12 years ago, he was one of the best doing it. And I thought that was interesting because you hear a lot of comedians go, I found my voice, and they're usually not very good. Like the good
Mhm.
ones that are good are like, I'm still trying to find it, and I'm not putting myself in the same category as Bill Burr, but I don't feel like I've found it yet, and I'm always trying to find it.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes I get glimpses of it, and I'm like, that's what I want to be all the time. I don't want to just be funny. Like, I know I can do a good job, and, it's my job to make people laugh for 45 minutes to an hour. I can do that. I know I can, but I want to say something like Bill Hicks did. And that's a tricky thing to do, to say what you feel and try to like broaden people's perspective a little bit, but still be funny, because that's the ultimate thing. Like you can't just be on a soapbox for 45 minutes. People will be like, is this a TED talk or a comedy show?
Yeah.
So it's hard to do that. But sometimes I get glimpses of it and then I feel like I've got it and then I don't got it. All of a sudden everything's clicking and then you were like, and then you go to a new environment and the crowd is younger or different, or they're not on board with all you're saying, and I don't know. So sorry, that was the longest winded
No,
answer ever.
no, no, that's wonderful. So, uh, what was it that made you feel like you needed to go towards teaching and wrestling? Like, was that expectations put upon you?
No, I mean, I was a good wrestler. I was a state champion in high school, and I just didn't really know what else to do. Um, but no one expected me to do it. And to be honest with you, I thought teaching sounded kind of like an easy gig, like I'll be that teacher that tells you to pass your test back to the person behind you and they'll grade it, and we'll watch a lot of films and I'll be funny, and
You get summers off.
you get your summers off, and you don't make a ton of money, but you get good insurance, and I don't know. But then the more I did teacher aiding and all that, I was like, teaching's not something you should go into half-ass. And I found like I didn't enjoy those kids. They were like sixth graders or eighth graders or something. And I was
Oh
like,
man,
it was a
middle school.
nightmare. I was like,
Yeah.
I don't want to be around these kids, you know? I don't know. So I just didn't, but I always knew in the back of my mind I was going to do something like this. And if I could do it over again, I probably would major in drama or something else. But I didn't. And I always try to tell myself when it comes to regrets, if I had done anything different, my little boy wouldn't be here potentially,
Mhm.
or at least not the little boy that he is. So, um, I always come back to that when I have any regrets about anything I did or didn't do. Like he wouldn't be here and I wouldn't trade him for anything. So just get over that right now,
Yeah.
basically.
And yeah, you got to where you are because of where you were. So,
Hmm.
yeah. How long after you found the Zen and comedy book did you decide, okay, I'm going to be courageous and I'm going to follow this path?
I knew when I went to bed that night that I was going to be a stand-up comedian. And I knew that I had always struggled with nerves, but I knew when it came to stand-up comedy, I just felt like I could do it. I just sometimes you just know things, and I just knew that and I think I read something in the book. You know what? It was before I'd read the book, but as I read this book, it started saying things like funny people can be taught how to do this, and you can learn how to do it and that kind of thing. So I knew, and I was so excited. I changed my major the next day and dropped an economics class I didn't need, and I was like, that looked like a nightmare anyway. So I graduated because I didn't want to get discouraged, and I actually mowed lawns that summer for a friend of mine. It sounds weird, but I knew I needed to get out of my comfort zone. So I went to Florida that summer and mowed lawns for a friend of mine's dad. And it sounds like a weird thing to prepare for stand-up comedy to go to Florida and mow lawns, but I wasn't super comfortable in that situation, like living with a friend's parents and working for him and potentially screwing up somebody's lawn or whatever. I just needed to get out of my comfort zone. So I did that, and just to get away from home and be kind of comfortable being uncomfortable. Because like I said, I've always struggled with nerves and I still do sometimes, but I get through it, and wrestling and all that kind of thing helped me prepare for what I do now. And so
Yeah.
anyway.
So the anxiety that you felt from mowing lawns, were you able to understand how to channel that and make it work for you on stage, like using the anxiety um, to propel you kind of into the presence?
Yeah, I mean, I know that might sound weird. Like, what do you mean you mowed lawns to get used to being nervous? But it was more like living in this person's house and being, 1,500 miles from home. And um, I'm not Mr. I'm not a handy person. So it was nerve-wracking. Like, I'm going to live with my buddy's dad and he's going to expect me to not be a dumbass and be one of his people that he's going to count on to do a good job.
So living with your friend's dad, I'm sure like gave you an opportunity to also be very observational about your situation, and develop an awareness of being in a different environment, which I feel like might be uh, a tenet of the comedy that you do, the presence of being observational. So how did you take the anxiety and use it to help you on stage? Like how did that anxiety go from your real life to using it as an advantage?
I think nerves are good as much as I absolutely hate the feeling, and I pray every day. And one of my prayers as I'm going to shows, especially when I'm feeling super anxious, is to make it go away or at least make it work for me. Um, so I think nerves are good. Um, but as much as I hate the feeling, when I don't have that feeling, my shows don't go as well. And I guess fortunately, I feel it most of the time. Um, it bothers me when I don't feel them. It's such a stupid, weird thing.
Mhm.
Like I hate the nerves, but when I don't have them, I'm like, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you nervous? This is going to go horribly because it's like it is very similar to how wrestling was. You like use that energy, and then when I go on stage, it almost all goes away. Or right before I go on stage, it usually kind of goes away. But so to answer your question, I think I I kind of miss the nerves if they're not there, but I absolutely hate that feeling. Like I was that kid that threw up the first week of school all the way up until high school.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so weird. I thought no kid on the planet went through that. And now that I'm older and I talk to people, I talk to people all the time. And they're like, yeah, I did. I went through that too. And I'm like, really? Because I thought I was the only one, which made it so much worse. Like all these other kids are okay going to school, you mental midget. What is wrong with you? Like,
Yeah,
it's just school, dude.
I went through that too, so I completely understand.
Really.
Do you have like a way that you could describe the process of like transforming that anxiety into fuel like right before you go on stage? Is there a process that you have, or is it just something that has happened organically?
Yeah, I like to be I like to be alone for a little bit. You know, like people always want to talk to me like right before I'm going on stage, and in my head I'm like I I can't, I'm not a good conversationalist before I go up, I'm so like I just want to be left alone for a minute, and I take deep breaths and I have certain things that I say to myself um that kind of get me where I need to be. At, as a performer and going in front of people is weird. Sometimes I'll walk into a club and it'll be packed or someplace and it'll be packed and there's usually a second where I'm like, I'm gonna do what? Like, like, why do you do this to yourself? But then I kind of just have to stand in the room for a minute and like look around and take a few breaths and be like, you know what you're doing. You're fine. But I don't like to watch other comedians before I go on stage, especially. I don't like if they're doing well. I don't like that, and I don't like it if they're eating it. I'm like, so I just don't watch much, which I feel bad about because most of my friends that are comedians are like, yeah, did you watch my set? And I'm like, not really. It's nothing personal. It just I'm better off when I don't.
Do you
So.
remember the first time that you did a stand-up thing after you decided that that was going to be your path? Do you remember what that was like and how that felt?
Yeah, I went to a few open mics to watch. Um, and then I picked a date on my calendar. Like I graduated in December of '98, and I decided I would start on, I think it was January 11th of '99 is when my would be my first open mic. So I circled that date. It was a Monday, and I we only got 3 minutes. So I had that 3 minutes down pretty cold, and I had some people in the audience that were friends. Like I think I had like 11 friends there, and it went really well. It went really well the first like 9 times that I did comedy. I mean, I would probably be mortified if I watched it now, but I remember thinking like, I, I remember thinking like, I know this is supposed to be hard and blah blah blah, but I don't think that applies to me. Like I think this is what I'm supposed to be doing with my life, and I think I'm a natural and blah blah blah. And the first time I got paid to do comedy was, I think, my 10th time. I made $8. It was a cut of the door, which was my cut was $8, and and it was on a Tuesday. It was called the Best of Kansas City. I got a spot on that, and I was supposed to do like 9 or 10 minutes, and I think I didn't get a laugh until like minute nine, and I was ready to quit. And then this guy came in. His name was Brian Burgess, who's like the funniest guy you've never heard of, and he did really well. Um, and I remember thinking like, well, he's been at this for 15 years. That's why he's so good. And all of us didn't do well on that show, and he did. And I went from I'm gonna quit to, well, you can't quit, dude. You've done it 9 times. This was going to happen. And even now, like about the time you have the thought of, I might not kill every time, but I'm not gonna eat it. Well, you better get ready because you're about to eat shit. Like you can't get too cocky about this stuff.
Yeah, and where was that show? Where were you living at the time?
It was in Kansas City. That's where I started. Uh, this great place called Stanford and Sons Comedy Club. I mean, to this day, it's probably the best stage I've ever been on. I had this black and white check stage and a wall you could lean against, which I really like. That when you can lean against a wall, and um, just the dimensions of the room were perfect, and the perfect width and the perfect length, and just always a hot crowd. Like if you didn't do well in that room, you probably weren't very funny. Um, so yeah, I remember it, and that's where I started, and that room's not there anymore, which is just an absolute shame. It was awesome.
Hmm. Yeah. So
Yeah.
$8 that night. And then how long was it until you like made that your kind of like regular thing that you did to earn a living?
It was I started in January like 11th, and then which is it's funny because I told myself I was like I'm going to get a degree. I'm going to give myself 2 years to learn how to do this. I'm not going to worry about making a nickel. I'm just going to learn how to do it. And I worked at this restaurant, and my stepfather and mom had a basement apartment. So I paid them a couple $100 a month in rent. I didn't have a lot of money. I didn't have a lot of bills, rather, or money, but I didn't have a lot of bills. And the restaurant closed down like January 1st. Like we walked in that day and they basically told us the restaurant was shut down. And everyone else was like pissed off because you didn't give us any notice. You're just shutting the restaurant down or whatever. But in my head, I was like, well, at that point, I was making a few $100 a week, featuring here and there, and MCing here and there, and it was all adding up to a few $100 a week. Um, so I decided then I'm like, I'm just gonna see how long I can ride this out without getting a job, and I haven't had a day job, and this is my 24th year of
Wow.
not having a day job. And sometimes I feel like I hamstrung myself, like I decided I'm gonna do this for a living, even if I don't get famous. And I've been doing it for a living for a long time, but I'm obviously still not famous. But that wasn't the goal when I started. It was just to tell jokes for a living and have a lot of free time. And that worked out well for a long time. And then the business changed in the last few years with social media and all that. And
Yeah.
now you almost have to be famous to make a decent living, and which kind of sucks. I really enjoyed being the anonymous headliner. I liked standing in the back of the room
Mm.
and no one really knowing who I was until I walked on that stage. And now it's not like that with the invention of TikTok and all these other terrible platforms where mediocrity can really thrive. I call it the glorification of mediocrity,
Yeah.
and I feel like that's what's happened to this country in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Some of the most popular stuff is so dumb. I mean, if you go to TikTok, you'll want to blow your brains out. If you're an artist, you're like, this is just shit. And there's so much good stuff out there that gets no attention at all. And
It's
you have to wonder,
oversaturated.
yeah, you have to wonder at some point, like, is this on purpose? Are they trying to dumb down this country? And I think maybe they are without getting all conspiratorial about it. I don't know, man.
Yeah, well, I want to say that that's no small thing for you to be able to support yourself for that many years just based on comedy. That's quite an accomplishment. So
Well, I
it's gonna,
appreciate that.
yeah.
I have a friend um, who's always like, he'll get drunk and he'll be like, Gaither, you're gonna make it, dude. You're gonna make it. And I'm like, well, I haven't had a day job in 24 years, and I have a home in Southern California, and
Right.
maybe I have made it,
Yeah.
dickhead. Like, why are you the gatekeeper of whether or not I'm successful or whatever? And it's
Yeah.
certainly a frustrating business these days, but
Yeah, I think you kind of made it.
Well, I appreciate it, but I just it just seems like it should be getting easier rather than harder in some regards. But
Yeah, so
uh,
Kansas City to Los Angeles?
yeah, we live in Southern California. It's about 20. Well, it's still Los Angeles, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, but
Uh
yeah, we
yeah, I lived in LA for a while, so I'm
okay.
familiar with that. How was that transition for you of like being based in the Midwest, Kansas City, and transitioning your life?
It was hard for me to leave because I lived with a buddy of mine from high school. He's on my high school wrestling team. I paid like next to nothing in rent, and we lived on like a 5 acre farm kind of. It wasn't he doesn't farm there, but he had 5 acres of land, and I had a go-kart that I walked into a Tractor Supply Company store one day stoned and walked out with a $1,500 go-kart and so I drove that thing all over the place, and I was on the road a lot, and it was a pretty good life. I was saving some money and becoming a headliner, and so when I moved out to LA, it was hard because I was used to making money, and I was becoming a headliner all over the country. And even when I featured, I sold a t-shirt, so I made pretty good money, and
Hmm.
I was saving a lot of money. Um and then when I moved out to LA, I kind of had to get in the back of the line at a lot of places behind people that frankly weren't that good at comedy,
Yeah, yeah.
and I still have to deal with that. Um,
What made you decide to move there?
um, I don't know. I think I wanted to pursue acting, and and I did, but I didn't. Like I got a commercial agent for a while, which I hated. I hated going to commercial auditions. They were always so stupid. And
Hmm.
um, I don't know if you've ever done anything like
Yeah,
that, but
yeah.
audition. Have you done auditions?
Yeah, I'm an actor too, so
Okay, okay,
I know the drill. Yeah.
yeah. I hated auditioning, and I hated driving as far as I had to drive and fighting traffic to read for 2 minutes. I'm like, and they never wanted you to do what was on the side. See, like, I don't have to tell you. It was just I never really got into the acting part, which I kind of, you know, I would still like to get into sketch comedy somehow. I can do voices, and I feel like I'm not. I always say, like, God will give me what I deserve. I'm using air quotes if we're just doing this on audio. God will give
Yeah.
me what I deserve when I use all the abilities He's given me, and I
Mm,
don't feel like I have yet.
yeah.
So it's probably my own fault. Um, but
Oh,
I have these things that I want to do that I haven't done yet.
there's still time. There's still time.
Yeah, I hope so, sister.
Maybe you can have your own sketch comedy show. I think maybe that's a
Maybe it's not beyond the realm of possibility. And my boy's 5, so maybe he'll be able to help me out with all this social media crap in a few years that I don't know. Don't get me
yeah,
started on
so
that.
you were in the back of the line in LA as you were describing. So how did you make your way forward? How did you navigate that?
Um, well, I mean, I got past at the Comedy Store pretty quickly, which is at the time I didn't think it was that big a deal. And now looking back on it, it kind of was. I wish I would have enjoyed it more. Um, but for me, I was like, I don't know. I got passed by Mitzi Shore, and I got passed in one showcase, which I'm not trying to brag or anything, but that was a pretty big deal. I've been told that only a handful of people were passed by Mitzi in one showcase. Like, I only know of one other person, and I'm sure there's more, but um, so I didn't think it was that big a deal. I was like, well, I'm starting to headline all over the country. Like, shouldn't I be shouldn't I be passed to do 15-minute sets at the Comedy Store? So I didn't think it was that big a deal. And um, but to answer your question, I I I think I think if you just get seen enough and you're good at it, that you know, Bill Burr said one time, he goes, "I'm just gonna get so freaking funny they can't deny me," and that's what I tried to do for a long time. and lately I don't know. I haven't been getting that many spots at the Comedy Store, and I don't know if the talent booker just doesn't like me or what. But it's frustrating. It's such a frustrating business. So many things are out of your control. Like there's places that I mean, not to sound like I'm bragging about it, but I'll destroy. I'll have a great set, and then I won't get rebooked there, and or at least not for a while. And every time I go back, they'll have these same few people that, frankly, don't have very good sets, and I'm like, what? Why?
Yeah,
What do you gotta do, man?
it seems like it's kind of a reflection of the way that society is going in a way. How do you feel like comedy has changed just from the time that you started until now?
Um, I don't know how to answer this without sounding like bitter or whatever, but they've gotten so focused on like diversity that sometimes they will book people that aren't that good at comedy just because it's like they're diverse. And I'm like, well, that's fine. Like if you're doing if like Last Comic Standing, for example, um, that should just, in my eyes, it should be the 12 funniest comedians. I don't care if they're 12 black guys or 12 women or 12 gay guys. I don't care about any of that. I just want them to be the 12 funniest people.
Hmm.
Um, but they pick those shows like they're picking donuts. Like, we'll take three black guys and we'll take two Asians and we'll take this. And it's like, just pick the funniest one. Don't pick them based on their race or their gender or their
Hmm.
sexuality or any of that stuff. Um, and not to cry about being a white guy, but these days they're like, we got enough white guys. We're good.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
uh, I don't
yeah.
know. I don't
I
want to
understand
sound,
what you're saying. Yeah.
yeah.
What is it that you think makes someone funny?
Gosh, I don't know, man. I'm a terrible audience member. I really am. Like I can watch Dave Chappelle for an hour and after the end of it, be like, wow, that was great. But realize I didn't laugh out loud one time. So to me, some people just make me laugh. And most of the people that I think are the funniest or that I've seen that made me laugh the hardest in stand up, you haven't heard of most of them, and most of them are dead. Um, which stinks. Greg Giraldo, he's gone. Patrice O'Neal is gone. Um, there was a guy named J. Scott Holman who's passed away now, but his career also got kind of derailed with alcoholism and some other stuff. But
Mhm.
he's the only guy I've ever sat down with my mom and was like, "You got to listen to this CD. He is so funny." And I still quote his stuff to this day to like strangers. And um, so I don't know, just a person makes me laugh more than like what they're saying. It's how they say it.
Yeah, like the
Um,
authenticity that they deliver, perhaps.
yeah, yeah, probably so.
Your sense of humor, did you have an upbringing where you were surrounded by people who had a similar sense of humor to you, or how was that developed, do you think?
Um, I mean, my dad was pretty funny in his own right. I mean, he still is in his own way. But no, I think I just at a young age, I was probably 5 the first time I made my brother and sister laugh. I impersonated like Oliver from Oliver Twist.
Mhm.
Please, want some more? And uh, and I kind of looked like him a little bit. So I did the impersonation, and my brother and sister just being like, "Do it again, do it again."
Yeah.
Um, so that's when I realized like I can make people laugh. And I was about 10 or so when I went to this camping trip with some cousins, and I was really funny there. And we went to this a concert, and it was kind of like an audience participation thing. And I had been pretending to be Australian, and I pretended I was Australian, and I was making people laugh in the crowd, and just things like that. And I would pick my moments in school to be funny, and So I don't, again, I feel like I'm answering all your questions terribly, but
No, you're not. You're answering them as you, which is what you're supposed to do. What about your
yeah,
son? Does your son have a similar sense of humor to you? Like, do you get to joke around with him?
I think he might. Sometimes I say things that I don't know if all little kids would get, and he gets the humor in it.
Hmm.
Um, and I love to make him laugh, and it bothers me when he seems sad. Um, he seems kind of serious sometimes. Um, but for the most part, yeah, I think he does. I think he does have a good sense of humor, and he gets nervous like I did about going to school and stuff, and I just try to make him laugh and tickle him, and I hope that stuff never goes away. I did. He was probably 2 the first time I impersonated Rocky. I did a scene from the Rocky movie, and he laughed so hard. And I got it recorded the second time, but the first time, I mean, he just laughed for it seemed like several minutes. Um, and then you know how little kids are, you'll make them laugh with something, and then you'll try to do it again, and they're like, all right, well that was funny, but I've heard it,
Right. Yeah.
like but you laughed so hard at it. So yeah, I think he's gonna have a good sense of humor.
Yeah, that's great. And you're able to like recognize anxiety that you experienced and kind of like guide him through that, which I'm sure is very valuable.
Yeah, I think so. I heard somebody say that um, you just change, and I still learning how to deal with it myself. So um, instead of saying like I have to do this, say I get to do this. And those little things, they go a long way. Like last year he was really struggling. It was his first year in pre-K or whatever, and I was like, instead of saying you have to do something, say I get to do something. I get to go to school. I get to see my friends. I get to learn. I get to go to recess. And that worked last year, but so far this year he's been like, yeah, all right, I get to. I don't want to. Like, damn,
Yeah.
it worked so well last year.
Yeah. So what are some things that you get to do that are on your horizon that you're hoping to?
I get to go to Nashville at the end of
Yeah.
October.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, for anyone listening, Tim is going to do a house concert at my place with my partner David, and I'll actually put the link to the tickets into the show notes so you can click on it easily. So you can purchase a ticket, and the address will be revealed to you after you purchase it, so we don't have people stalking us or coming over or camping out. But yeah, we're looking forward to that.
yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. You guys seem like very nice people, and I joked with David in one of our text messages. I was like, "So this isn't some elaborate plan to murder me, right? Like, you're not gonna get me in your home, and then it's gonna be like some kind of um, Twilight Zone deal." But no,
No, I'm definitely not.
okay. Well,
You're in good hands.
after talking to both of you, I don't feel like that's gonna be the case. But
He really
I'm looking forward
admires
to it.
you and your comedy, so you'll be taken care of for sure.
Well, I appreciate that, and I hope I don't disappoint you guys. That's always my biggest uh, thing. I don't want to disappoint people who enjoy what I do. So,
Oh, I don't think you're disappointing anyone.
well, we'll see.
You don't get to disappoint people. What do you get to do? Come on, let's change this around.
No, I try to say the same thing to myself after I kind of taught him that. I started saying it myself. Like, I don't have to do any of this. No one's making
Yeah.
you do this. No one's making you do stand up. No one's making you exercise. No one's making you do anything that causes you to be uncomfortable. You get to do it. You're still healthy
Yeah.
enough to exercise. I didn't grow up in a very positive environment. My dad is a very negative person.
Hmm.
Um, I used to do a joke sometimes in my act where, can we cuss on this? Like,
Oh
is that
yeah,
okay?
yeah. Feel
Okay,
free. Yeah.
okay.
Be authentic.
My my uh my mom would try to be positive, And she'd be like, Jim, you have to be positive. You just have to be positive. He'd be like, oh, I'm positive that we're fucked. So that's kind of how I grew up, just sometimes to this day I'll call him and be like, so how you doing? He'll be like, oh, wonderful, and that when he says that, I'm like, he's being sarcastic. That's not wonderful.
Has
Um,
he come to your shows? Like, does he come out and support?
he's been to a couple. It's been a while.
Yeah,
It's been a while. I mean, I love my dad, but we're not super tight or anything. I don't know if
yeah,
it's the generation he grew up in or whatever, but sometimes I'll call him and he very rarely says like, "So how you doing?
mm,
How's my grandson?" And I'm like,
yeah,
"Aren't you curious like how my life is going? Like, does it always have to be just how you doing, Dad? Oh, wonderful. This happened, and this guy screwing me on this, and this blah blah blah." I'm like, Jesus. you know. Um,
yeah.
so
I can relate
sometimes,
to that. Yeah, for sure.
uh,
But also, that probably contributed to your personality and the environment that you grew up and your observations and like what you're able to do with comedy. So,
yeah, I try to tell myself that about everything, all the things that happened in my life, good, bad, and indifferent, all led me to where I am, and um, you know, some days are harder than others to see the positive, but when I allow myself to, you know, things are pretty good, and I'm not a bad person, and considering some of the things that happened to me growing up, I probably could be, and no one could really fault me. And but there comes a time in your life as an adult where I feel like you have to, um, no matter what happened to you that was bad or whatever. I had a high school wrestling coach that really kind of drove this home for me. He's like, that sucks that happened. What are you going to do about it? You
mhm.
know, because ultimately nobody gives a shit. Like
Yeah,
people can be sympathetic and whatever, but what are you going to do about it? Are you just going to be miserable or wallow in it or whatever, or are you going to try to make something positive out of it?
yeah,
Um, so that's what I hope to teach my boy, and I've also tried to teach him even from a young age, like, son, sometimes you just got to suck it up. Sometimes you're uncomfortable. Sometimes things suck for a variety of reasons. Sometimes you just got to suck it up.
yeah. I
So
imagine that helped you along the way in your comedy as well.
yeah, wrestling, you know, if it wasn't for that sport, I don't know where I would be right now, but it probably wouldn't be very good.
Yeah. It kind
So,
of
yeah.
provided you with like tools and discipline and a structure of how to move
Yeah, and
forward.
a, and
Yeah.
a, and a confidence and all those things that I still struggle with sometimes, but if it wasn't for that sport, like I said, my brother and I had that sport, and he and I are both doing pretty well and relatively well, and my siblings didn't have that sport, and they're not doing as well.
Hmm.
So I'll say that.
Yeah. In your comedy moments, is there a particular moment where you can remember that you felt like, oh, I'm doing really well? Is there like a specific moment that you arrived and you're like, I'm doing well?
On stage, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the audience will tell you whether you're doing well. But yes and no. Like even on stage, like I try not to get too cocky about it. Like in my head, like if I start thinking like, "Wow, this is going great," then all of a sudden the crowd falls off, and then or it doesn't sound as good to you. Um, but yeah, I mean the crowd will tell you, so you know whether you're doing well. But sometimes you'll be doing well and you're still not completely comfortable.
Hmm.
Um, and then sometimes you'll be super comfortable before you go up, and then you don't get the same payback from it. I don't know if I'm answering this very well.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you ever feel like when you're on stage, you kind of hit like a flow state where you're just in the zone? I imagine wrestling, you probably could get there too.
Yeah, sometimes you just, the crowd makes all the difference. Like I've said this before, like if crowds knew how much better we are when they're good, they would always be good.
Mhm.
It's like having a conversation with somebody. If I sat here and talked to you, but you wouldn't respond to anything I asked you, I wouldn't want to talk to you for very long.
Right.
But when you're on stage and they're not laughing, you still got to keep going. But when they're with you and they're laughing at all the subtle stuff, um, it just gives you so much confidence, and you can be who you're truly supposed to be up there. And that there's no better feeling than that. Um, and crowds have changed a lot in the last few years. I don't feel like overall they're as good as they used to be.
Mhm.
People have gotten so brainwashed into thinking they can't laugh at certain things, that they're just flat out not as good as they used to be. I told my wife a few years ago, I was on the road and I was like, I have got to get a real following and people who come specifically to see me, because crowds aren't as good as they used to be. And it's just a freaking shame that it's happened subtly through phones or propaganda or whatever, has caused it. And I'm not saying they're all like that, but it was very rare that I used to have, um, a bad show or one that I wasn't really, that it wasn't fun, or there wasn't hecklers. That used to be pretty rare. And now
Mhm.
there's always someone who gets, I'd say it happens once a week. There's someone who gets offended, or somebody you can tell hates you, or that never
Mhm.
used to happen. That never used to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think it's a generational thing?
I don't think cell phones have helped us in that regard. People's attention spans aren't as good. Um, it's a shame that we've gone backwards as far as like racial stuff.
Yeah.
I used to have this chunk in my act. It was just a minute long bit or so, something, but it was about race, and it never didn't do well. Like even if I didn't love the crowd or it was just an average show or whatever, it didn't matter. When I got to this particular part in my act, it always destroyed. It always did well. And now when I do that particular bit, and I still pull it out sometimes, you would think I was trying to lead a Klan rally with the way
Mhm.
people get so like, I don't, is that okay? And I'm like, yes, it is. And
Yeah.
I've listened to like that particular bit from like 2012 with it just destroying. And now in 2024, when people are like, or sometimes people come up to me after shows and they're like, I wanted to laugh at what you were saying about whatever, and I thought it was so funny, but I didn't know if the people around me would get bothered. And I'm like, you're part of the problem and you don't even know it.
Yeah. Yeah. Comedy is so important to our society and being able to like understand our human existence and like understand how to even navigate that. So that's really unfortunate. I hope that changes.
Yeah, and going back to something you were saying earlier about growing up, my brother and I lived with my stepmother and my dad for a few years, and she, God rest her soul, and she, now that I'm older, I look back and I realize why she was the way she was in a lot of regards. But she didn't treat us very well, and our lives were pretty miserable for a couple of years when we weren't wrestling, but we could always make each other laugh about it.
Mhm.
And like people growing up, uh, gay, or they had to develop, at least when I was growing up, they had to develop these. Gay people were some of the funniest people I ever met in my life, because
Mhm.
they had to deal with real things. Um, my uncle Joe, who was gay, and some all his friends that I met at his celebration of life, I remember thinking these are some of the funniest people I've ever met in my life. And this was when I was like 16, 18 years old. Um, but the people that have to deal with things and use humor to get through it,
Mhm.
um, those are my people, man. You know?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like even like the darkest Shakespearean tragedy has moments of comedy within it, and you have to have the light and the dark for it to make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was like 11, I think, when I listened to Sam Kinison for the first time. I was like five, or he did like a 5 minute bit, 5 or 7 minutes on Rodney Dangerfield's Young Comedian special. And I was about 11 at the time. And up until my parents got divorced, I was raised Southern Baptist. And he was joking about like Jesus getting nailed to the cross and all this stuff that I remember thinking, I am not supposed to be laughing at this, but it was so funny. And it planted a seed for me. And now that's the kind of comedy I like, to make people laugh at stuff they're not really supposed to laugh at. It's I can't joke about chicken nuggets and shit. It's just not funny to me.
Right.
Um, you know, I mean, I suppose I could write jokes about it, but it's like the crowd can tell, like, speaking of your authentic self, he's not really being himself up
Mhm.
there. And crowds don't like it when I'm dirty either. Like when if I say something gross, people have never liked to hear that from me for whatever reason. They can tell like that's not me.
Yeah.
Because I'll be in the audience sometimes and I'll listen to a comic sometimes, and I've watched a lot of comedy. Actually, I don't watch that much, but I've been around comedy a lot, and still some things some people say, I'm just like, ugh, God, And so when I try to do anything like that, the crowd always pulls back on me. They can tell that's not really who I am, you know.
Yeah.
As far as gross stuff, like I won't even get into some of it, but some of the things people. I was at the comedy
Yeah.
store
Yeah.
last night, and this guy was talking about like just vile shit. And I'm like, man, that's so gross. And people are laughing at it. And I'm like, they wouldn't laugh at me doing that.
But you know that, so you're aware of who you are, which is a lot more than most people can say, I think. So
Yeah, well, I'm trying to be. So,
yeah,
yeah.
so you probably have a lot of wisdom from all of your years of doing comedy. So do you have anything that stands out to you that you would like want to pass on to someone who might be trying to get into comedy, or any advice?
Um, I don't know if I came to this conclusion myself or if it's something I read when I was first starting out, but I've always tried to remember um, they're just people, you know, in the audience. They're just people. Um, so don't let them build you up or tear you down too much, because that's all they are. They're people, and mainly people who couldn't do what you do to save their life, you
Mm.
know. So don't let them have too much power over you, and just keep that in mind. And it doesn't matter if the first time goes well or any of that. They don't remember when you didn't do well, they just don't. So don't give people too much power, and just get on stage and get used to how uncomfortable it is, holding a microphone and hearing your voice amplified for the first time, and be prepared for how bright the lights are and how little you can see beyond the front row. And it's pretty intimidating. Um, but at the end of the day, you know, and I'm 25 years into this, I'm like, dude, relax. They're just people, man. Bombing is not going to kill you, and I've proven that on a couple of occasions.
So, I know that our time is getting close because I want you to be able to receive your son soon, but um, I usually wrap up the show with this one question, and that is, if your inner voice had a billboard, what would it say to the world?
Oh wow. First of all, unless you're just tired of me, I'm not in that big of a hurry.
Oh,
I've got
okay,
a little bit of
okay.
time. Um, he's not going to be home for another hour and a half. I do have to go get my blood drawn, but other than that, and if this is cut out, if the beginning of this is cut out, I'm just going to get my blood drawn for a doctor's appointment. This so it's not that big a deal. But I'm not dying or anything. But ask the question again because I was kind of confused by it a little bit.
Yeah, if your inner voice had a billboard, what would it say to the world?
Um,
You can take your time too.
if my inner voice had a billboard, what would it say to the world? Um, Relax, breathe, have fun, and do what you do. You know,
Mhm.
um, that maybe that would be it because that's something I tell myself um, often before I go on stage, especially when I'm feeling nerves and pacing back and forth and all that. Just relax, breathe, have fun, and do what you do. Um, that would probably be it, I guess. And I think that's important for all of us. Just take your time and have fun doing what you're doing. That's so important. And we lose sight of it. I mean, I do comedy for a living and I lose sight of that all the time. But that's ultimately what's about. And Richard Pryor said, if you have fun, they'll have fun.
Mhm.
And I found that to be true, you know. Sometimes you just gotta, and my friend Greg Warren said this. He was like, sometimes you just gotta let your talent take over. Stop worrying so much about it and just do what you do the way you do it, you
Yeah.
know, and
Yeah.
they'll get on board or they won't, but chances are they will, you know. Like I don't have a ton of energy on stage or any of that, but I can follow pretty much anybody, you know, with their energy and it's not always easy, but I just go at the pace that I go and the crowd will get into my rhythm, you know, 9 times out of 10. And if they don't, I'll survive.
Yeah. Like claim your space.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Claim your space.
I also think that as a performer myself, like one of the best things that I like about it is just the opportunity to like get someone to like think a little differently or have a different perspective. And I think comedy is really good at that.
Yeah, I think that's it bothers me how many people aren't okay admitting they were wrong, you know? Like I hope that I'm wrong about what's happening in this world and what I think potentially is happening in this world. I say that all the time. Nothing would make me happier than to be wrong about a lot of things that I believe. But people are very stubborn when it comes to that stuff, and I really
Mhm.
don't understand that. I've never had a problem going, "Wow, I was so wrong about that," you know.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't get that about people, but um, people are very stubborn, you know. And I'm stubborn too in my own right. I'm not like perfect in that regard by any means, but yeah, people are stubborn.
They are, yes, and opinionated, and divisive, I feel like.
Yeah.
What do you feel as far as like social media and comedy? Because you were talking about that earlier, and I know it's affected you, and probably like the gigs that you were able to get, because like even actors or people casting are like, how many followers does this person have? How can I benefit over like their social media following and presence? So
Yeah.
how do you how do you feel that that can change? How can we change this so it gets back to just authentic like presence and performance of people who are putting in the work rather than
Gosh, I mean, I wish I knew. I'm not sure. I feel like it's coming back around. Like I think, you know, as much as I seem to complain about it, I think people do want to hear um I think people are getting away from trying to be so politically correct and all that stuff. I think people are kind of tired of it and are enjoying more off humor as far as for lack of a better way to say it. I think it is coming back around. I wish the big tech giants and the social media platforms would just let the cream rise to the top rather than um, pushing out so much bullshit. there's so much stuff out there. Like I said, that like if you go to, I don't spend much time on TikTok at all because it'll drive me insane. I've started putting some videos on there or whatever because you never know what's gonna do well. But I tell you what, man, the things that I enjoy the most or that I'm most proud of, they never do that. It never does that well. And I'll throw up something that I'm not particularly proud of or whatever just to get something up for the day or whatever, and that'll always do well. And
Hmm.
it's so like I've heard that like Chinese TikTok, they build up their children. They teach them like high level math and and build up their self-esteem and all this and the stuff that gets popular on our TikTok that our kids see is like some guy farting at a Walmart or
Right.
whatever. And it's like just the dumbing down of it feels like someone is trying to destroy America. You know that in a lot of ways, just all the shit that gets pushed up to the front, and it's so disheartening. Some of these videos that you can tell are clearly faked will have hundreds of thousands of views, and then somebody can have a really good stand-up clip, and not just me, but lots of people, and a few hundred views or whatever. They don't, or YouTube is so frustrating. I'll put up a video sometimes, it'll get 14,000 views in like an hour. And then they'll just stop showing it to people. You'll look
Hmm.
5 days later and it'll be at like 14,500. It's like, well, this was clearly doing well. Why did you stop allowing people to see it? And they have control of all that stuff.
Right.
I
It's
don't, I don't,
doing a little too well, so they can't control it.
something. And I started joking about things during COVID that all of a sudden my YouTube went from getting 300 subscribers every single day for several months, and it was really blowing up. And I thought this is finally happening for me.
Hmm.
And the comments were very positive, and very rarely did someone say anything negative about me. And I was like, this is finally happening. I've been doing well on the road for over 20 years, and it's finally going to be seen on a mass scale. And then I started joking about certain things, and all of a sudden the numbers just went, and I'm like, that's not coincidence.
Do you do you think they're censoring you
Oh,
to, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. And not just me. There's a lot of
right.
people that,
Yep. Mhm.
um, and especially I feel like this sounds so like woe is me, and I don't mean to sound that way, but like I feel like sometimes when they see somebody has potential to do well, they'll be like, we need to go ahead and not push this out because we could see him blowing up or her blowing up, and we don't want her to or him to. So let's just stop it right now. And maybe I'm completely wrong about that. Maybe I'm just being bitter or whatever, and I need to
I don't
try
know. I
harder.
mean, there are algorithms in place, so like those whoever who manages those, who knows what
Yeah.
they're managing or squashing or
Yeah.
not wanting to monetize.
And the comedy clubs, man, they have got I want to get away from comedy clubs altogether because they've disappointed me so much as far as they'll book some TikTok dork who has
Mm,
a funny video on TikTok, or the Haktua girl or whatever. She's got that. She said one thing. You expect her to headline a comedy club
right.
for making that comment and it going viral? Like now she's a headliner. Do you know how insulting that is to people who have paid their dues and have
Hmm.
gotten really good at something as hard as stand-up comedy, and you're just going to push them to the forefront because you're going to make some money in the short term.
Hmm. Yeah,
It,
it's really diminishing the craft of
yeah,
and the art of what you do, which is an art form. And
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Sometimes I'll be on a show and I'll follow so much bad comedy that when you go up and you actually know what you're doing, it's like the crowd's like, what's he doing? Like, this is stand-up, you dumbasses. All that other shit was just, shit.
Yeah.
I sound so bitter. I don't mean
No,
to.
no, you didn't know it. You don't.
I'm grateful.
You're speaking the truth. Um, I'm sure you're not the only one who feels this way.
Oh, I know. I know I'm not. And like I said, some of the funniest people in this business are people you've never heard of and likely never will unless things change. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen.
I don't know. We should maybe start an organization to
Yeah.
to rally.
Yeah, I mean there are platforms out there and stuff that you can where there's a will, there's a way, and you know, it's not like it's impossible. You can just throw enough stuff against the wall and see what sticks, and you know, we'll see. My main thing is I want my little boy to be proud of me, and I want
Mm.
him to see what's possible, and I want to have a good enough career that he can be proud of me, especially when he gets old enough to understand it. That drives me more than anything, than money or fame or any of that. I just want my little boy to be proud of me.
Yeah.
Um, it almost makes me tear up saying
Oh,
that, but
yeah.
that's what I want above everything. I don't want my boy to think his daddy's a loser.
Aw, well, with your drive and your discipline and the love for the craft, like as you said, I feel like eventually the cream will rise to the top. Um,
I hope so, sister.
yeah.
I've been hearing people say for 20 years, you're getting ready to blow up. And now I'm like, now when people say that shit, I'm like, all right. That would mean more to me if I hadn't heard it for 20 years, but
Right. And what does
uh,
that mean? You don't want to blow up, we want to keep you here.
yeah, I don't even know what that means anymore. Um, I don't even know if I would want to be famous. It looks pretty annoying. I would like Brian Regan kind of fame where he can like sell out an arena and then walk down the street and nobody knows who he is. That would be nice, you
All
know.
right. All right, we'll get on that.
Yeah, make
Yeah.
that happen, guys. I do think from what I've talked to David, I'm like, and I think I've joked around with him. I'm like, dude, you should manage me, you know. Um,
Yeah, yeah. He knows who you are. There's people that definitely know who you are, so I feel like
I'll be honest with you. That's always weird to me when someone goes, "Oh yeah, I've heard of you." I'm like, "No, you haven't. You're lying. You think I want to hear that, but I think you're full of shit."
no. No,
uh,
you've claimed your space in the comedy world, and I think only great things are ahead for you. So,
well, that's very nice of you. I appreciate it. I hope I haven't been a huge disappointment on this
oh my God,
podcast.
no, it's been wonderful.
Or if there's anything else you wanted to talk about that, I'm pretty
Yeah, if,
um
if there's anything on your mind or your heart, or that you feel like you would love to share, this is like your platform or a chance to.
um I just want people to look deeper into things that are happening in our world and realize that I think we've been divided in by design. Um, I think there are people who benefit from that division,
Mhm.
and my best friend for over 20 years is not my best friend anymore. We don't even talk, and all because I brought some things to his attention that he didn't want to hear.
Mhm.
And if you would have asked me um, 5 years ago to make a list of people who I would never not be friends with, he would have been at the top of that list. And there's been a couple of people um, that's happened with. And then I've had friends that die, and my little brother died,
Mhm.
um, it sounds cliche or whatever, but life is short. And the older I get, the more I realize that. And my little boy went from being a baby to almost 6 years old now. And, this is all fleeting. And we get so caught up in bullshit and things that ultimately don't matter. Um, it's just a shame to me that we can't love each other more. And I'm not super I couldn't tell you more than a handful of Bible verses, and I get confused sometimes reading the Bible and all that. And I'm not pushing religion or anything on anybody, but the gist of what Jesus taught was love people, forgive them, and be grateful for what you have. And, and if you do those three things, if you genuinely try to practice those three things, your life gets better
Mhm.
and easier, and and I'm no expert. I struggle with that stuff all the time for a variety of reasons. I can be the most negative person in the world, and sometimes I can be the most positive, and I want to be. It's like I'm two people, and I want to be this guy all the time. And when I am, I'm like, I love this guy. And when I'm this guy, I'm like, I can't stand this guy. I don't want to be around him, but it sucks when that's you.
Mhm. Yeah, like it's something to anchor back to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I hate when my little boy sees this guy. I want him to only see this guy. Um,
Oh.
but I told him when my little brother died, and I don't think I've ever told this story on a podcast, so I hope I don't cry. It's only been recently that I could tell this story without crying, but
I won't judge you. You're welcome. You have a
um,
safe container.
yeah, when my little brother passed away, my boy was like 2, and I was reading him a book, and my brother's death was very raw and recent at the time, and I was reading him a book, and I had this thought in my mind. I was like, I wonder if my dad ever read Ace, is what we called him. That was his middle name, but his name was Cody. And I was like, I wonder if my dad ever read Ace a book.
Mm-hmm.
And I came to the sad realization pretty quickly that the answer was probably no.
Mm-hmm.
And so I turned my little boy to me, and I was crying. And I said, son, I am going to make a lot of mistakes, but I promise you, I will always tell you that I'm sorry. And and he reached out and grabbed my chin and looked at me, and he was only 2, but he looked at me like, it's okay, Daddy. And it was such a powerful moment in my life. And and now I try to always immediately be like, ah, I'm so sorry I did that. I'm so sorry I lost my temper because you broke my glasses or whatever you did that made me lose my mind for a minute. Um, you shouldn't have done that, and I'm upset about it, but I did not need to get that mad about it. It's not the end of the world, and I love you, and I'm sorry, and I've done a good job of that. I haven't been perfect about everything, but I have done
Yeah.
a good job of that. And I hope to always do that, and I hope that he's not uh I just want him to be happy.
Yeah.
So
That's
so anyway.
beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks for making me cry on your stupid
Oh.
podcast. I'm not crying for anybody who can I get fired up sometimes, and it's hot in here, and
Oh.
so um but yeah. So there's that. There was my what's that lady that always makes people cry? Who was that? Barbara Walters.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
she always made people cry.
What a claim
So
to fame.
way to go, Whitney.
Yay. So if people would like to explore your comedy or like where you're going to be performing or
People are like,
anything
that's a
about
comedian.
you.
He seems like a total drama queen. Take it easy, dude. God, trying to get some laughs over here, you butthole. Um,
Where can we guide them to?
my YouTube is where they can find most of my comedy, youtube.com/Tim Gaither. Um, I've got Instagram at Tim Gaither. I've got a um, Facebook, comedian Tim Gaither, and Timothy Gaither is my personal page, and but youtube.com/Tim Gaither is the main place they can find it. I've also got a podcast called The Truthican,
Mm.
which is on Rockfin, ROKFIN.com/Tim Gaither. I would love to put it on YouTube, but I'm afraid they would just yank most of them down because some of the things we talk about, and I don't like to
Yeah.
be censored, and I don't like to censor myself when I'm talking about certain things, and um, you might not disagree with, or you might not agree with everything we have to say, and that's fine. But the things we believe and we talk about all come from wanting the best for the country and wanting the best for humanity, and
Hmm.
it's not from any nefarious place in our hearts. So you don't have to agree with it. And like we say all the time, nothing would make us happier than to be wrong. We just don't think we are
You're
when
right.
it comes to certain things. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously we don't think we're wrong about certain things. We wouldn't talk about them, but I just want the country to come together and the world to come together and just try to love each other. It's not that hard to be nice to people. And you going back to something you said earlier in the podcast about the hardest thing about going from the Midwest to LA
Yeah.
was I feel like a lot of people in LA are always looking over their shoulder to see if there's someone more important to talk to, you know, when you're having a conversation with them.
Yep.
And people didn't know how to take me. I think they always acted like I was trying to get something out of them, and I'd be like, "So how you doing?" You know, they'd be like, "What do you want?" I'm like, "I don't want anything.
Yeah.
Just asking how you're doing because you're human, or saying hello to someone as you're passing them on the sidewalk. Hey, buddy." They'll be like, "Why
Right.
are you
Right.
talking to me?" You know,
Mhm.
like because you're a person and we're passing each other. And
Yeah.
I have some of the best conversations of my life on planes with strangers, and at parks, and sometimes I never see these people again. And one of my prayers almost every day is put the right people in my path, and God answers that prayer for me all the time. I
Yeah.
talk to people all the time that I really get something out of the conversation, and 9 times out of 10 we never talk again. Um, but it was what I needed in that moment, you know. And so anyway, I hope this hasn't been the worst podcast ever.
It's been terrible. It's awful. I can't. There's no way I can release this. I'm just,
You're gonna
so.
find a way to be like, our podcast didn't. There's something about it didn't record. I'm sorry. Um,
So your
which I
website,
have,
yeah.
which I honestly have done with people that I'm like, this podcast was terrible. Where I
Yeah, I
couldn't stand the person or whatever. I've done that, so I'm just admitting it. I have done that with a couple of people, but you
no,
know,
this has been great. Great. Thank you, Timothy Gaither. Do people call you Timothy? Is that like a if you got in trouble when you were a kid or
no, my mom never. I don't. I honestly cannot think of one time that my mom called me Timothy. And no, people don't call me Timothy. My Facebook is Timothy Gaither for some reason. I think the person who set it up put it as Timothy. Maybe there was another Tim Gaither out there. But no, people don't call me Timothy. If I really know someone from childhood or something or their relatives, they'll call me Timmy. Or I don't mind if I like someone and they call me Timmy, you know, as like a
Mhm.
endearing name or whatever. But if I don't like someone and they call me that, I'm like, yeah, don't call me that, you
Yeah.
know. It seems kind of condescending when they do it, but I try to like most people. I try to love people as best I can, even if it's really hard sometimes.
Oh,
And it is really hard sometimes.
yeah.
So, but I've enjoyed talking to you. Thanks for letting
Yeah.
me just ramble about shit. I know I tend to ramble sometimes. So thank you. And I
No,
apologize
thank
at the same
you.
time.
It's been
Yeah.
wonderful. Yeah.
Good.
Well, we're looking forward to having you soon.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it too. And I think I might stay an extra day,
Okay.
or at least go home later that night or something. So, I've never been to Nashville. I don't believe I've
What?
ever been. Yeah, it's crazy, right? I mean, I've worked in 44 states and I've worked in Tennessee, but never Nashville.
Wow.
Um, it's one of the places I would toy with moving someday, but no, never been.
Yeah, well, we'll help you explore it and kind of get a feel for it.
Yeah, I would consider moving there someday, but
I
no,
could see that.
it's a great place to be a comedian, from what I understand.
Yeah. Um,
So,
Nate Bargatze like is from the town that we're living in right now. So like
okay.
there's definitely
Yeah, I've done spots with Nate at the Comedy and Magic Club, and seems like a super nice guy. I've not had a lot of conversation with him, but seems like a good dude. And so, yeah,
yeah, Nashville's a really interesting place. There's a lot of people moving here from California and LA. Like it's becoming more of a hub, I think, for
good.
creative people. So
Yeah, I
yeah.
think I would like to maybe move there someday. We'll see. So the only thing I love about California is the weather.
I
The
know.
weather is a big thing for me. And man, you know, you've lived
Oh
here.
yeah, I know.
The weather is just amazing, you know?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to come from that to here. Nashville is like hot and humid and but yeah.
Yeah, I grew up in Kansas City, so I understand.
You get it, yeah.
Um, yeah, pretty brutal sometimes, but yeah, how is it in the wintertime though?
It's pretty mild. Like last winter, we had some snow, and a little bit of snow shut down the whole city just because they don't have the infrastructure to, deal with it. But it's fine.
But for the most part, you don't like in Kansas City, it would get so cold that I would get in my car and just be like pissed
No.
off because it was so cold. Just that whole
You-
like fuck,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know,
it's not
it
that.
doesn't get
Yeah,
like that.
no, I lived in Chicago, so I know exactly what you mean. But no. No, it doesn't get that cold. It's pretty mild. It gets
Okay,
like gray and gloomy, like, but in kind of like LA in a way, like rainy and gray and
yeah. When I was in Kansas City, I hated the humidity because I was when I quit wrestling, I don't know, I haven't drank in 14 years, but I used to drink a fair amount, and I was probably 25, maybe 30 pounds heavier than I am now. So I got kind of fat for a while. So that, and I ate like shit, and the humidity really drove me crazy when I was heavier and unhealthy, and I had bad allergies because Kansas City's terrible for it, and humidity drove me crazy. But now that I'm
yeah.
in better shape, I kind of like sweating, so maybe it wouldn't bother me as much. So
Yeah,
maybe.
it makes you look younger too, because it's like moisture in your skin. So
Is that it? All right. Well, cool. All right. Well, I
all
won't keep
right.
you all day. I
Have
feel
fun
like,
getting your blood drawn. Like that sounds like a good
yeah,
time.
it's not too bad. It's no big deal. I've actually had to do it a few times the last couple of years. I've got this thyroid issue that they're trying to figure out. So anyway, it's not any
All
big
right.
deal.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
All
right.
right. Oh,
Well, have a great day. Enjoy your son and getting your blood drawn.
yeah. Thanks for having me, Whitney. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I'll talk soon.
Okay. Have a great day. Bye
You
bye.
too. Bye. Thank you so much for joining me this week. If you're listening and you like what you hear, please consider subscribing and rating this podcast, as it really helps get this podcast out to other people who might be interested in hearing it but don't know about it yet. And also, if you'd like to contact me or reach me, you can reach me at unconditioningpodcast@gmail.com or unconditioningpodcast on Instagram. Thank you so much. And until next time, stay tuned in to you.